May 19th, 1945. The harbour at Antwerp sat quiet under grey Belgian skies. 11 days, that's how long the war in Europe had been over. 11 days since Nazi surrender, since the last shot fired on the Western Front. Captain Thaddeus Aldridge stood on the dock watching transport ships disgorge their cargo. 6 tanks, British tanks, prototypes they called Centurion. They rolled down the ramps like mourners arriving late to a funeral. Too late. The thought echoed in Aldridge's mind as he watched British crews scramble around the machines. Young men with oil-stained hands and disappointment carved into their faces. They had rushed these tanks across the channel for the ultimate test. Combat against German armour, Tiger tanks, Panther tanks, the steel monsters that had killed so many Allied crews. But the Tigers were silent now, the Panthers destroyed. The war won without these late arrivals. Aldridge pulled his jacket tighter against the wind. At 25, he carried himself with the rigid posture of a man who had seen too much. His eyes tracked the Centurions with professional assessment. Low-slung hulls, thick-cast turrets, the profile of something built to survive, not to impress. An American sergeant standing nearby spat tobacco juice into the harbour. Limeys finally build a real tank and the war's already over. Typical. Laughter rippled through the American observers. Men from the Ordnance Department, engineers and liaison officers sent to evaluate Allied equipment. They had come expecting to see British innovation tested in battle. Instead, they got an expensive failure of timing. Colonel Montgomery Ashford approached through the crowd. 55 years old, silver-haired, moving with the deliberate pace of a career officer who had learned patience the hard way. He stopped beside Aldridge. "What do you see, Captain?" Aldridge gestured at the Centurions. 6 tanks that missed their war, sir." Ashford nodded slowly. His eyes never left the British tanks. "Watch them anyway, Thad. Sometimes the ones that arrive late teach you everything the early ones never could." The memory came unbidden. August 1944. Falaise Pocket. Normandy burning under summer sun. Aldridge had been a lieutenant then, fresh from the States. Assigned to an armoured liaison unit coordinating with British forces, his younger brother Nathaniel had been a loader in an M4 Sherman, 3rd Armoured Division, 19 years old, with a farm boy's optimism that war hadn't yet beaten out of him. Nate had written home about the French countryside, about liberating villages, about how the Shermans were doing fine against the German tanks they encountered. Then the Tigers showed up. Aldridge had been 300 yards away when Nate's Sherman took the hit. An 88mm round through the frontal armour. The Sherman brewed up in seconds. That's what the tankers called it. Brewing up, like making tea, a polite euphemism for men burning alive in a steel coffin. Aldridge ran toward the flames. Other soldiers held him back. The screaming lasted 43 seconds. He counted every one. 4 men died in that Sherman. The commander got out. Burned so badly he died 2 days later in a field hospital, but he got out. Nate never made it to the hatches. The after-action report was clinical. Inadequate frontal armour, insufficient gun to engage Tigers at safe range. Crew compartment became death trap when ammunition ignited. Recommendations: improved armour, better gun, redesigned interior to enhance crew survivability. Recommendations that came too late for Nathaniel Aldridge and thousands like him. Standing on the Antwerp docks, watching Centurions arrive 11 days after the war ended, Aldridge felt the old anger stir. These British tanks looked different from Shermans, heavier, more deliberate in their design. Built with a philosophy he didn't yet understand, but recognized nonetheless. Someone had decided crew survival mattered more than production speed. Someone had learned the lessons Nate's death should have taught. Operation Sentry began a week later. The British planned extensive trials across Belgium and Germany. 2,300 miles of varied terrain, mountains, forests, urban rubble, everything a tank might encounter in combat. Aldridge received orders to observe and report. The US Army wanted detailed assessments, armor thickness, gun performance, mechanical reliability, crew ergonomics, everything that might inform American tank development. Colonel Ashford pulled him aside before the trials began. "The brass thinks this is a waste of time, Thad. War's over. These tanks are irrelevant. But I want you to look deeper. British lost a lot of good crews in bad tanks. Same as us. They had 6 years to learn what works and what kills. Pay attention." Aldridge nodded. "What am I looking for, sir?" Ashford lit a cigarette, exhaled slowly. "Why they built it this way. Every design choice has a reason, usually written in blood. Find those reasons." The trials revealed a machine unlike anything Aldridge had studied. The Centurion weighed 45 tons. American doctrine called for 40-ton tanks maximum. Lighter meant easier to transport, easier to bridge, easier to deploy. But the British had prioritized something else. Aldridge watched engineers measure the frontal armor. 150 millimeters on the turret face, heavily sloped glacis plate on the hull, thickness the Sherman could never match. He thought of Nate's tank burning in 43 seconds. The gun interested him more, a 17-pounder, the same weapon British Firefly Shermans carried. It had killed Tigers in Normandy. He had seen the intelligence reports, but mounting it in a purpose-built tank with proper optics and fire control made it something else entirely. Then came the feature that changed everything: gun depression. Aldridge watched a Centurion commander demonstrate. The gunner tilted the barrel downward, 10 degrees below horizontal. It seemed minor, a technical detail, but Aldridge understood immediately. 10 degrees of gun depression meant the tank could fight from hull-down positions, nestle behind a ridge with only the turret exposed, fire over obstacles that would force other tanks to expose their entire hull. The Sherman managed 5 degrees of depression, sometimes less. American crews had to crest ridges fully to engage targets. Full exposure, full vulnerability. How many died because they couldn't hide their hull? How many, like Nate? Over the following weeks, Aldridge filled 3 notebooks with observations. The Meteor engine, a derivative of the Rolls-Royce Merlin that powered Spitfires. 650 horsepower, not the fastest tank. Soviet designs topped 55 kilometers per hour. The Centurion managed 35, but it kept running. 2,300 miles of trials, mud, snow, summer heat, urban debris. The Centurions maintained 92% operational readiness. Minor mechanical issues only, nothing that stopped them for long. British crews raved about visibility, 5 periscopes for the commander, excellent optics for the gunner. Fighting a tank meant seeing the enemy first. The Centurion let you see. And the interior space. Room to move, room to load ammunition, room to escape if everything went wrong. Aldridge measured the hatches, timed egress drills. A trained crew could evacuate in under 20 seconds. Nate had 43 seconds of screaming, never reached the hatches. The design philosophy became clear. Protect the crew first, kill the enemy second, survive to fight tomorrow third. American doctrine had run the opposite direction. Build them cheap, build them fast, replace losses with production. "We spent men to save steel," Aldridge wrote in his final report. The British spent steel to save men. The War Department filed his report and forgot about it. 8 years passed. Aldridge made captain, then major, then lieutenant colonel, then full colonel by 1953. He married, had a daughter, named her Natalie. As close to Nathaniel as he could get without making his wife ask questions she didn't want answered. He never stopped thinking about tanks, about armor philosophy, about the choices that meant some crews went home and others burned. October 1953 found him at Emu Field in South Australia, middle of nowhere, red desert, stretching to every horizon. He was 33 years old and witnessing something no one had seen before. Operation Totem, a British nuclear weapons test. The Centurion sat 400 yards from ground zero, tank number 169041. They had loaded it with ammunition, fueled it completely, left the engine running. Scientists wanted to know what happened to armored vehicles in nuclear war. Aldridge stood in the observation bunker with Ashford and a dozen other officers. The colonel had aged into his 60s but still moved with purpose, still asked the questions no one else considered. "Why leave the engine running?" someone asked. A British physicist answered. "Operational tank represents realistic scenario. We need to know if crews could survive and continue fighting." Aldridge felt cold despite the Australian heat. The countdown reached 0. 9.1 kilotons of atomic fire turned night into day. The shockwave hit 3 seconds later. Even in the bunker 5 miles away, they felt the earth move. Dust rained from the ceiling. Men grabbed tables for stability. When the initial flash faded, they watched the mushroom cloud climb into the stratosphere. No one spoke for a long time. 3 days later, when radiation levels dropped enough, they sent teams to examine the tank. Aldridge insisted on going. Ashford tried to stop him. "It's safe enough," Aldridge said, "and I need to see." The Centurion sat skewed left from its original position, pushed back approximately 5 feet by the blast wave. Side skirts had blown off and scattered across 200 yards of desert. Antennas stripped clean, optics sandblasted into uselessness, but it sat there, intact. The examination team approached carefully, radiation detectors clicking. They reached the hull, climbed onto the deck. One of them opened the driver's hatch. The engine had stopped. Someone checked the fuel gauge, empty. The tank had run for 3 days after surviving an atomic blast, only stopped when it consumed the last drop of gasoline. Aldridge climbed into the commander's position, sat in the seat, looked through the sandblasted periscopes at the scorched desert. He thought about Nate, about that 88mm round punching through Sherman armor like paper, about how American doctrine had decided production volume mattered more than crew protection. And here sat a British tank that had survived the literal end of the world. They towed it back to the weapons range at Woomera, decontaminated the hull, replaced damaged components. 3 weeks later, it was operational again. The report went to London and Washington. Most officials saw it as interesting data, proof that armored warfare might survive tactical nuclear exchange. Aldridge saw something else, a philosophy that worked. November 1950, Korea. The Cold War turned hot on a peninsula most Americans couldn't find on a map. North Korean forces surged south with Soviet backing. T-34 tanks spearheaded the assault. The South Korean army collapsed in days. The United States scrambled forces from occupation duty in Japan, including the 8th King's Royal Irish Hussars. British Army, equipped with Centurion Mark III tanks. Aldridge received deployment orders in October, liaison officer to British armoured units. His job: observe, assess, report back on how Allied tanks performed in modern combat. He shipped out in November, left his wife and daughter in Virginia, promised to write, promised to come home. The troopship took 3 weeks to reach Busan. Korea looked cold and hostile from the harbour. Mountains everywhere. Terrain that American doctrine said was unsuitable for armour. Infantry country, the manuals claimed. Tanks need open ground. Aldridge met the British tank crews in December. They were setting up outside a village whose name he never learned. Young men, mostly. Veterans of the recent war mixed with new recruits. They treated their centurions like trusted friends. Painted names on the turrets: Alice, Achilles, Aggressor. The tank commanders welcomed him formally. Offered tea in the officers' mess tent. British hospitality in a frozen Korean winter. Captain Alistair Pembroke stood out immediately, 32 years old, tall and lean with dark hair going grey at the temples. He commanded C Squadron and had fought centurions in the final months of the European War, one of the few who had. "You're the American observer, then?" Pembroke's accent carried the clipped precision of expensive schools. "Colonel Aldridge, sir, here to learn." "Me," Pembroke smiled slightly. "Honest answer, most of your lot arrive thinking they'll teach us." They walked through the motor pool together, centurions lined up in neat rows, crews performed maintenance despite the cold, checking track tension, testing guns, the eternal rhythm of armored units. "What do you think of the terrain, Colonel?" Pembroke gestured at the mountains. "Doctrine says it's wrong for tanks." "Your doctrine or ours?" "Both," I thought. Pembroke stopped beside his command tank, ran a gloved hand along the barrel. "Doctrine gets written by men who weren't there when it mattered. We'll see what reality has to say." Reality came in April. The Chinese People's Volunteer Army launched their spring offensive with overwhelming numbers. Hundreds of thousands of troops poured south. Their objective: destroy the United Nations forces and reunify Korea under communist control. The British 29th Independent Infantry Brigade held positions north of the Imjin River. Good defensive terrain, hills and ridges, but the Chinese attacked with 30,000 men, wave after wave of infantry. Artillery preparation that turned hillsides into moonscapes. The brigade began withdrawing under pressure. Fighting retreat towards secondary positions, they needed covering fire. Something to slow the Chinese advance. C Squadron centurions moved forward. Aldridge rode with Pembroke's command tank. He had authorization to observe combat operations, no authority to participate, but he loaded his rifle anyway and climbed into the turret basket. The tank smelled like oil and cordite and the sweat of frightened men. They rolled north through the pre-dawn darkness. April in Korea meant cold mornings and uncertain weather. Fog hung in the valleys. Perfect for infantry, terrible for tanks, or so the doctrine claimed. Pembroke stood in the commander's hatch, studying the terrain through binoculars. His gunner and loader sat ready. The driver navigated carefully along the narrow road. Dawn broke grey and colourless. The first Chinese positions appeared as shadows in the fog. Pembroke spoke calmly into the radio net. Coordinates, targets, fire commands. The 17-pounder barked. The tank rocked with recoil. A distant hillside erupted in flame. More targets, more commands. The centurions moved into positions Aldridge thought impossible, up steep inclines that should have stopped them, into hull-down positions behind ridges where only the turrets showed. 10 degrees of gun depression. The British could hide their hulls and still fire. Chinese infantry swarmed the valleys below. Machine guns chattered. High explosive rounds detonated among the masses. And the centurions held. For 6 hours they held. The 29th Brigade withdrew through their positions. Infantry squads fell back covered by tank fire. Belgian troops, British troops, Filipino troops, all filtering south, while C Squadron made the Chinese pay for every yard. Aldridge watched Pembroke fight his tank with cold precision. No wasted movement, no panic. Target, range, fire, reload, next target. The Chinese tried flanking maneuvers. The centurions shifted positions, used their mobility to maintain advantage, climbed slopes the enemy never expected armor to reach. By noon, the withdrawal was complete. C Squadron pulled back last. Fighting retrograde, Pembroke's tank took 3 hits from Chinese anti-tank rifles. The rounds sparked off the armor and did nothing. They reached friendly lines in early afternoon. Pembroke ordered his crew to perform immediate maintenance, check for damage, refuel, rearm, be ready to go again in 2 hours. Then he climbed down and lit a cigarette with shaking hands. Aldridge approached him. "Your doctrine manual said this was infantry country." Pembroke exhaled smoke. Wrote that manual before centurions, didn't they? Turns out anywhere a tank can reach is tank country. The Chinese learned that today. American General John O'Daniel visited the positions that evening, watched the centurions refuel, spoke with the British commanders. His assessment went into official reports. In their centurions, the British have taught us that any ground a tank can physically reach becomes tank country, even mountaintops, especially mountaintops with these machines. Aldridge wrote his own report that night, detailed observations, technical assessments, but he kept coming back to one thought. The tank that arrived 11 days too late for World War II had just redefined armored warfare in Korea, and somewhere, in ways he was only beginning to understand, Nate's death was teaching them still. The fog rolled back in after dark. Aldridge sat in his tent writing letters home, to his wife, to his daughter, trying to explain what he had witnessed without explaining anything at all. Colonel Ashford found him after midnight. The old man looked tired, carried a flask of bourbon. "Saw your report, Thad. Good work." "Thank you, sir." Ashford sat down heavily on a camp stool. "You know what they'll say in Washington, that we need to study British tactics, maybe incorporate some lessons, then they'll keep building tanks the way we always have." Why? Because changing course means admitting we were wrong, means admitting we spent men to save money. Nobody wants to say that out loud. Aldridge thought about Nate screaming in a burning Sherman. Maybe seeing it in combat will change minds. Ashford offered the flask. Aldridge took it. The bourbon burned warm. "Maybe," Ashford said. "Or maybe it takes 50 years and a generation of officers who saw what you saw, who understand that sometimes arriving late means you have time to learn the right lessons." In the distance, artillery rumbled. The war continued. The Chinese regrouped. Tomorrow would bring more fighting, but tonight Aldridge sat in a frozen tent in Korea, thinking about 6 tanks that arrived in Antwerp 11 days after the war ended, thinking about a nuclear test survivor in the Australian desert, thinking about centurions climbing mountains that doctrine said were impossible, and thinking that maybe, just maybe, being too late for one war meant being perfectly positioned for all the wars that followed. He finished his letter home, sealed it, wrote the address carefully. Outside, the fog pressed close and cold. Inside, Captain Thaddeus Aldridge began to understand what Colonel Ashford had known all along. Sometimes failure teaches you everything success never could. Korea changed Aldridge. He returned home in July 1951 with a Bronze Star and 3 notebooks filled with observations about centurions redefining armor warfare. His daughter was 14 months old, didn't recognize him at first. His wife held him that first night while he tried to explain things he couldn't put into words. The sound of 17-pounders firing, Pembroke's hands shaking after 6 hours of continuous combat, the way centurions had climbed mountains and done what Shermans never could. He didn't tell her he kept seeing Nate's Sherman brewing up. Every single day, the army promoted him to full colonel within 2 years, assigned him to the Ordnance Department, tank development and acquisition. They wanted his combat observations, his technical assessments. What they got was an obsession. November 1956. The Hungarian Revolution collapsed under Soviet treads. But Western intelligence captured detailed photographs of a T-54A tank during the brief uprising. Those photographs reached Fort Halstead in England within a week. Aldridge received an invitation in December. "Come see what the Soviets are building." He flew to London in January, 36 years old now, greying at the temples. Colonel Ashford met him at Heathrow, 66 and officially retired but still advising on armour development. "They want to show you something, Thad, something that changes everything." Fort Halstead sat in the Kent countryside. The captured T-54A intelligence sat in a warehouse under harsh lights. Aldridge studied the specifications: low profile, thick sloped armor, 100mm gun. A British engineer named Wallace joined them, thin man with wire-rimmed glasses. The T-54's frontal armor is substantially thicker than estimated, 120mm at extreme angles. Effective thickness approaches 200mm. Wallace spread technical drawings. Our current 20-pounder cannot guarantee penetration of frontal armor at combat ranges. We're outgunned. The words hung cold in the warehouse air. "Show him the solution," Ashford said quietly. Wallace led them to another building. A prototype gun sat on a test mount, 105mm, rifled barrel gleaming. The L7 fires armor-piercing, fin-stabilized, discarding sabot rounds at 1,700 meters per second, penetrates 200mm at 2,000 meters. Aldridge did the math instantly. The L7 could kill T-54s before they could effectively engage. When can it be fielded? Wallace showed him the mounting specifications, every dimension calculated with obsessive care. The L7 fits existing Centurion turrets, minimal modification required. Recoil stays under 290mm, works within current systems. Any Centurion in service can be upgraded without redesigning the turret or rebuilding the hull. The implications hit Aldridge like a physical blow. You can upgrade an entire fleet, every existing Centurion. Give them all a gun that kills T-54s at 2 kilometers without scrapping the tanks. Precisely. A tank designed in 43 accepts a weapon developed in 56. Build the platform to last. Upgrade the systems as technology advances. Aldridge thought about American development. The M46 replacing the M26, the M47 replacing the M46, the M48 replacing the M47. 3 different tanks in less than a decade, each requiring complete retooling, billions spent on entirely new platforms. The British had designed one tank that could absorb generations of improvements. He thought about Nate, always Nate, burning in a Sherman obsolete before it rolled off the production line. Wallace continued discussing muzzle velocity and penetration values. Ashford watched Aldridge's face. "You're thinking about bringing this home. We need this gun. We need this philosophy. Stop throwing away entire designs every 5 years. Pentagon won't like admitting British engineering is better." Aldridge turned to Wallace. "What would it take to license this for American tanks?" "Technically, the L7 could mount in your M48 patterns with modification. Your M60 program could adopt it from the start." Ashford smiled grimly. "Hard sell, Thad. You're asking the Army to admit we got it wrong." "I'm asking them to stop getting soldiers killed in tanks that can't fight the next war." The Pentagon meeting stretched through spring. Armor Board officials, ordnance representatives, congressmen worried about costs and politics. Aldridge presented the data coldly. T-54 armor thickness, L7 penetration values, kill probabilities at range. "The British will license us this gun. We designate it M68. Give our crews a weapon that works against Soviet armor." One general asked the question everyone thought. "If we adopt this, we're admitting their design philosophy is superior. That acceptable?" Aldridge thought about 43 seconds of screaming. "My brother burned alive in an M4 Sherman, sir. If admitting we were wrong saves lives, yes, that's acceptable." The room went quiet. The L7 license was approved in August 1957, designated M68 for American service. Production began at Watervliet Arsenal. Aldridge watched the first American-made version test fire in December. The gun roared, the target erupted. 2,000 meters direct hit. He thought about upgrade philosophy, about building things that lasted, and wondered what else the tank that came too late could teach. September 1965. The heat in India was suffocating. Aldridge stood on an observation ridge watching tank formations maneuver. 45 years old now, full colonel for over a decade, the silver eagles on his shoulders had lost their shine from years of wear. He was here as a neutral observer. United Nations monitoring post between India and Pakistan, both sides massed armor along the border. The Indian formations below included 42 Centurion tanks. British-built, facing them 168 Pakistani tanks, American M47 and M48 patterns. The irony tasted bitter. Aldridge had helped develop the M48, and now he watched American tanks prepare to fight British tanks with an American observer caught in the middle. The Pakistani attack came before dawn on September the 6th. The Indians had spent the previous night breaching irrigation canals. The sugarcane fields flooded slowly, invisibly. By dawn, the ground was saturated, soft, treacherous. Pakistani patterns rolled forward at first light, speed and firepower. American doctrine, aggressive maneuver. They hit the mud at 30 kilometers per hour. The first tanks bogged immediately, tracks churning, hulls settling, crews panicking. Indian Centurions opened fire from three sides. Aldridge watched through binoculars, watched American tanks he had helped develop burn under British guns he had helped bring to America. The Centurions fought hull down, 10 degrees of gun depression, only turrets exposed. L7 guns killing M48s that couldn't effectively return fire while mired in mud. The battle lasted 12 hours. By evening, 97 Pakistani tanks littered the battlefield, destroyed or captured. Indian losses, 10 tanks. Aldridge walked the battlefield 2 days later. Official inspection. The burned-out patterns sat in neat rows, some still smouldering. He stopped beside an M48, a single L7 penetration through the mantlet. The crew had evacuated, lucky, but the tank was a total loss. An Indian brigadier approached, Tej Singh, early 40s, professional soldier with British training. "Colonel Aldridge, your tanks fought well, but the ground defeated them more than our guns." "The ground you flooded overnight," Singh smiled slightly. "Terrain is a weapon. The British taught us that." They walked between the wrecks. Singh pointed at a Centurion nearby, scorched paint, track damage, but operational. That tank was built in '52, 13 years old, upgraded with the L7 3 years ago. Today it destroyed 4 of your newest patterns. Do you know why? Aldridge knew, had known since Fort Holstead. Philosophy. You build platforms that last, upgrade the systems. We build new models every few years and start over. Your M68 gun is our L7. You recognized quality, but you put it in tanks you will replace in 5 years. We put it in tanks we will upgrade again in 5 years. That is patience. The battlefield was being renamed Patton Nagar, Patton City. Aldridge cabled Washington that night. Detailed report, but the core message was brutal. British Centurion design, 20 years old, decisively defeated American M47/M48 patterns. Superior doctrine, superior upgrade philosophy. We are building the wrong tanks. The response came within a week. "Thank you for your observations. Continue monitoring. Nothing would change." The Pentagon had invested billions in the Patton series. Admitting failure meant hearings, budget battles, careers ending. Easier to call Asal Uttar an anomaly. Aldridge sat drinking Indian whiskey that night, thinking about Nate, about American doctrine that prioritized everything except bringing crews home alive. About 6 tanks arriving in Antwerp 11 days late. About lessons nobody wanted to learn. June 1967. The 6-day war exploded across the Middle East. Israel struck preemptively. Airstrikes, armored thrusts, desperate precision. Aldridge was in Tel Aviv when it started, 47 years old, Technical advisor to Israeli Defense Forces, the Israelis had purchased Centurions and called them Shot, Hebrew for whip. Upgraded them with L7 guns, improved fire control, better engines. The main assault targeted Egyptian positions in Sinai, fortified defenses, minefields, artillery. The Egyptian army had prepared for years with Soviet equipment and doctrine. Israeli doctrine said attack anyway, attack at night. Attack from unexpected directions. Aldridge rode with an armored column toward Abu Agila, major defensive complex. Intelligence said 200 Egyptian tanks defending, T-54s mostly. The Israelis had 150 tanks, mix of Centurions and M48s patterns, British L7s and American M68s working together. The attack began after midnight. Aldridge watched from a command half-track, watched paratroopers infiltrate under darkness, watched artillery preparation walk across trenches, and watched Centurions do something unprecedented. Night tank assault coordinated with infantry and artillery, moving through minefields, engaging bunkers at point-blank range. The L7 guns fired illumination rounds, high explosive, armor-piercing when Egyptian tanks counterattacked. The night erupted in flame. By dawn the position was taken. Egyptian losses, 60 tanks destroyed, defensive positions overrun. An Israeli tank commander found Aldridge after the battle, young captain, face blackened with smoke. "Your M68 gun worked well tonight, Colonel. Killed T-54s at ranges they could not respond. We are grateful." The M68 is the British L7. We just build it in America. "We know, we use both. Same gun, good gun, kept us alive." Aldridge thought about Fort Halstead, about choosing to license British technology. "How many tanks did you lose?" 11 damaged, 3 total losses. We will recover and repair most. The Centurions especially, good platforms, easy to fix. We will upgrade them again next year. Better armor, better sights, same hull, same turret. The philosophy again, build to last, upgrade continuously. The captain looked at burning Egyptian positions. "My father fought in 48 with old Shermans. He said they were death traps, this Centurion. I will take my son to see it in a museum someday. Tell him his father survived because engineers built something that worked." Aldridge felt something break inside. Some dam holding back 23 years of grief. Nate never got to have a son, never got to grow old, burned at 19 in a Sherman built cheap. This Israeli captain would survive because someone decided crew survival mattered. That night, Aldridge wrote a letter to his wife. "I finally understand what Nate's death was meant to teach us. When we build machines to fight, we choose what we value. The British chose to bring their boys home. We chose to build more tanks. I spent 22 years learning which choice was right." He kept the letter in his notebook, never sent it, but read it sometimes when the weight got heavy. October 1973. Aldridge was in Washington when the news broke. Yom Kippur, Syria and Egypt attacked Israel simultaneously. The first reports were catastrophic. Syrian armor pouring across Golan Heights, Egyptian forces crossing Suez, Israeli positions overrun. The Pentagon went into crisis mode. Aldridge received orders within hours. Get to Israel, assess the situation, report on equipment performance. He flew out on military transport, 53 years old, exhausted, watching young soldiers and remembering Korea, remembering Nate. The situation was worse than intelligence indicated. On Golan Heights, Syrian forces deployed 1,400 tanks, T-54s, T-55s, T-62s, newest Soviet equipment, massive artillery, air defenses. Israel had fewer than 200 tanks defending the entire Golan, scattered among brigades, Centurions mostly. The Shot variants upgraded over years, 200 versus 1,400. Aldridge reached IDF Northern Command on October 8th. Fighting had raged 3 days, Syrian forces penetrating deep, some positions overrun. A sector called Valley of Tears had become critical. Syrian armor concentrating, trying to break through. 100 Israeli tanks held that valley. Centurions against 500 Syrian tanks in that sector alone. The Israeli commander was Colonel Raphael Kovac, 39 years old, veteran of every war Israel had fought. He met Aldridge in a command bunker. Maps covered walls, radio chatter filled the air. "Colonel Aldridge, welcome to the apocalypse." "What's the situation?" Kovac pointed at the map. Red markers for Syrian forces, blue for Israeli. The red outnumbered blue catastrophically. "They attack at night with infrared sights we lack. Point-blank range, 30 to 60 meters. Our advantage is crew training and these." He tapped a Centurion schematic. "The L7 gun, more accurate at range in daylight. Gun depression lets us fight hull down from ridges, and the armor keeps us alive when they hit us." "How long can you hold?" "As long as tanks keep running and crews keep breathing." Aldridge spent 2 days in the valley, watching Centurions fight impossible battles, watching crews reload until their hands bled, watching Syrian tanks burn under L7 fire, and watching Israeli tanks burn when numbers overwhelmed them. He met Lieutenant Devorah Shamir, 24 years old, first female tank commander in IDF. She had fought 48 hours continuously, gone through 3 tanks as each was destroyed. "This is my 4th, she said, touching the Centurion's hull. "The first took a missile, crew evacuated, the second burned, loader died. The third threw track under artillery. We abandoned it." "And you keep going back?" "The tank keeps bringing me out alive. Even when they kill it, the crew survives. That's the philosophy. Protect the people. Let the metal die if it must." Aldridge thought about Nate, about 43 seconds, about never reaching the hatches. "Yes, that's the philosophy." "Then I keep going back. This tank earns the faith we put in it." An hour 48 arrived with Syrian forces massing for another assault. Kovac had 7 operational Centurions left, 7 tanks against 200 Syrian vehicles. The radio crackled, Syrian tanks advancing, multiple vectors, overwhelming force. Kovac looked at Aldridge across the maps. "Colonel, can we hold?" Aldridge thought about 28 years of watching Centurions fight, every terrain, every enemy, Korea, India, Sinai. And he thought about 6 tanks arriving 11 days late in Antwerp. "Yes, you hold." They held for 2 more days. Centurions fought from positions Syrian tanks couldn't match. L7 guns killed at ranges T-55s couldn't return fire. Crews who had trained together executed maneuvers in their sleep. When Syrian forces withdrew on October 10th, Valley of Tears earned its name. 200 Syrian tanks destroyed, hulls scattered across the valley floor. Israeli losses, 47 tanks, more than half the defending force. But they held the line. The Golan did not fall. Aldridge walked the battlefield afterward, documented damage, wrote reports about weapons effectiveness, and understood finally what Ashford had meant 28 years ago. Sometimes arriving late means you have time to learn the right lessons. The Centurion had missed World War II by 11 days, but it learned from 6 years of war, learned what worked, what killed, what brought men home, and for 28 years it kept teaching those lessons. Aldridge stood beside a burned Centurion in the Valley of Tears, scorched armor, turret askew, crew hatches open where men had escaped alive. He thought about Nate one final time. "We learned, little brother. Took us long enough, but we finally learned." The war continued. But something had changed in Aldridge, some understanding crystallized by 28 years of watching a supposedly obsolete tank redefine armor warfare. Being late wasn't failure, it was the chance to get it right for all the wars that followed. October 15th, 1973, 5 days after the Valley of Tears went silent. The Golan Heights smelled like burned metal and diesel and death. Aldridge stood in an Israeli technical assessment tent studying damage reports. 47 Centurions destroyed or damaged beyond field repair. But 163 crew members survived, evacuated through hatches that opened. Armor that held long enough for men to escape. The Syrian forces left behind 207 wrecked tanks, T-54s, T-55s, T-62s, Soviet doctrine that prioritized numbers over survivability. An Israeli major presented the technical analysis. Young man, mechanical engineering degree. He spoke with clinical precision. The L7 gun achieved kill ratios exceeding our projections. Average engagement range was 1,800 meters. Syrian tanks required closure to under 1,000 meters for effective return fire. Our gun depression averaging -10 degrees allowed hull-down positioning that reduced our exposure by 73%. Crew survival rates in destroyed vehicles exceeded 85%. Aldridge looked up from the reports. 85% of crews survived even when their tanks were destroyed? Yes, sir. The Centurion's design philosophy prioritizes crew survivability, spaced armor, large hatches, fire suppression systems. When the tank dies, the crew lives, usually. Lieutenant Shamir entered the tent. She had showered, changed uniforms, but her hands still shook slightly when she poured coffee. "Fourth tank is back in service, Colonel. They patched the track damage. We are operational again." The Major smiled. "You see, this is the other factor. Upgrade philosophy." Lieutenant Shamir's first tank was built in 1953, 20 years old, but we installed the L7 gun in 68, new fire control in 71, Continental diesel engine last year, same hull, same turret, better systems. That is how you maintain an effective force without replacing everything every 5 years. Aldridge thought about American tank development, the M48 giving way to the M60, the M60 now facing replacement by the XM1 Abrams program. 3 different platforms in 20 years, each requiring complete retraining, complete logistics chains, billions in development costs. And here sat Israel fighting modern war with tanks designed in 1943, winning because they understood what mattered: protect the crew, upgrade the weapons, build platforms that last. The same lesson Nate's death should have taught 29 years ago. Colonel Kovac found him that evening. The Israeli commander looked exhausted, aged a decade in 1 week, but alive, still commanding. "Walk with me, Thaddeus." "Walk." They walked through the tank park, Centurions in various states of repair, crews working by floodlight, the eternal rhythm of armor units after battle. Fix what broke. Prepare for tomorrow. Kovac stopped beside a Centurion with scorched paint and track damage. "This tank took 7 hits, 73mm Syrian recoilless rifle, RPG-7 anti-tank grenade, 1 AT-3 missile that malfunctioned. The crew has bruises, hearing damage, but they are alive." Good engineering? No. Good philosophy. Your country builds good tanks now. The M60 with your M68 gun works well, but you will replace it soon. Scrap the entire design. Start over with the Abrams. We will take these Centurions and upgrade them again. New armor packages, new sights, new engines perhaps, and in 10 years we will upgrade them again. Kovac turned to face Aldridge directly. "Do you know why we do this? Why we keep these old tanks instead of buying new? Cost? Partly, but mainly because they work, because the design is sound, because British engineers in 1943 understood something your engineers keep forgetting. A tank is not just a weapon. It is a home. Men live in it, fight in it, die in it. Build the home to last and upgrade the weapons as needed." Aldridge watched crews work on their tanks. Young men, old men, women like Shamir, all of them trusting their lives to designs older than most of them. "My brother died in a Sherman," he said quietly. 1944. Normandy. The crew compartment became an inferno. He never made it out. Kovac nodded slowly. "I know, I read your file, and now you have spent 28 years watching centurions fight, watching crews survive, learning the lessons your brother's death should have taught. Yes? Yes. Then go home and teach them, make them understand, before more brothers burn in tanks built wrong." The years passed in official reports and technical assessments. Aldridge returned to Washington in November, wrote detailed analysis of Golan Heights combat, presented findings to the Armor Board, recommended continued use of M68 gun in the new XM1 Abrams program, advocated for upgrade philosophy over complete replacement cycles. Most of his recommendations were ignored. The Abrams would be revolutionary: gas turbine engine, composite armor, digital fire control, state-of-the-art, but built as a complete system that would be difficult to upgrade incrementally. He retired from active duty in 1978. 30 years of service, colonel rank, decorations from 3 countries, and a certainty that the lessons he had learned would die with his generation. His wife threw him a retirement party. Their daughter attended with her own children now, grandchildren who called him Papa and asked him to tell stories about tanks. He told them about Korea, about centurions climbing mountains. He didn't tell them about Nate screaming. Some lessons were too heavy for children. Colonel Ashford attended the party. 88 years old now. Fragile but sharp-minded. They sat in Aldridge's study after everyone left. Bourbon and silence between old men who had seen too much. "You did good work, Thad." "Did I? The Abrams will be a fine tank. But we still don't build for upgrade, still don't prioritize crew survival over impressive specifications. You brought the L7 home. The M68 saved lives. That matters." "Nate's still dead." Ashford sipped his bourbon. "Nate's death taught you what matters, and you spent 30 years trying to teach others. That is all any of us can do. Plant seeds, hope they grow after we are gone." The old colonel died 6 months later. Heart failure, military funeral at Arlington. Aldridge stood in the rain watching them lower Ashford into the ground. Another teacher gone, another voice silenced. But seeds had been planted. June 1982. The invitation arrived in official Army stationery. Aberdeen Proving Ground requested his presence for a special ceremony. Tank number 169041 was being inducted into the museum collection. The nuclear test survivor, the machine that had survived the apocalypse. Aldridge drove to Maryland on a humid summer morning. 62 years old now, fully grey, moving a bit slower, but still straight-backed, still carrying himself like a soldier. The tank sat on display outside the museum, freshly painted, restored to appearance if not function. A placard beside it detailed its history. Centurion Mark III, serial number 169041, survived 9.1 kiloton nuclear test, October 1953, Emu Field, Australia, decontaminated and returned to service. Museum acquisition, 1982. A small crowd gathered. Military officials, historians, a few British officers from the embassy, and Devorah Shamir. Lieutenant Colonel now, Israeli Defense Forces liaison to the United States. She found him before the ceremony started. "Colonel Aldridge, it is good to see you." "Devorah, you look well. How is the service?" "Busy. We are upgrading the Centurions again, reactive armor packages, laser rangefinders, same tanks from Golan, just better every year. Still haven't replaced them. Why would we? They work. We add what we need. The philosophy holds." The ceremony began with speeches. Museum director, army officials, polite words about historical preservation and technical achievement. Then they asked Aldridge to speak. He walked to the podium slowly, looked at the gathered crowd, at the tank behind him, at the years compressed into this moment. He had prepared notes, formal remarks, safe words. He left the notes in his pocket. May 19th, 1945. His voice carried across the quiet crowd. I stood on a dock in Antwerp, Belgium, watching 6 of these tanks arrive. The war had been over for 11 days. Everyone said they were too late, obsolete before they ever fired a shot. A failure of timing that would be forgotten within a year. He paused, let the words settle. October 15th, 1953. I stood in the Australian desert watching this specific tank survive a nuclear weapon. 9.1 kilotons of atomic fire. It was pushed back 5 feet. Lost some side skirts, but the engine kept running. 3 days later, we drove it away. Still radioactive, still functional, still teaching us that we had built our own tanks wrong. A slight shift in his stance, memory pulling him back. April 1951, Korea. I watched centurions climb mountains our doctrine said were impossible for armor. Watched them cover a withdrawal that saved an entire brigade. Watched them redefine what a tank could do. September 1965. Asal Uttar. I watched Indian centurions destroy American-made patterns by the dozens. Watched our newest tanks burn under guns from a design 20 years old. He looked directly at Devorah Shamir standing in the crowd. June 1967, Sinai Peninsula. I watched Israeli crews conduct the first large-scale night tank assault in history. Watched them coordinate armor and infantry and artillery with precision we were still trying to learn. October 1973. Valley of Tears. I watched 100 centurions hold against 1,400 Syrian tanks. Watched them fight for 50 hours straight. His voice roughened. The dam breaking after 38 years. My brother Nathaniel was 19 years old when he died in an M4 Sherman. Normandy, August 1944. An 88mm round punched through the frontal armor. The crew compartment became an inferno in seconds. He steadied himself against the podium. The crowd stood silent. Nate never made it to the hatches. The Sherman was built cheap, built fast, built to replace losses with production volume. We sacrificed men to save steel. The British made a different choice. They sacrificed steel to save men. This tank behind me proves it. Survived the atom, fought for 30 years, brought crew after crew home alive, even when the metal died. His eyes found Shamir again. Lieutenant Colonel Shamir went through 3 tanks in 2 days at the Golan Heights. 3 different centurions destroyed beneath her. She is standing here today because British engineers in 1943 decided crew survival mattered more than cost, more than speed, more than any other factor. Nate died so Devorah could live. That is what 11 days late really means. It means having time to learn every lesson, having time to get it right, having time to build something that lasts. His voice dropped almost to a whisper. This tank arrived too late for World War II, but it was perfectly on time for every war that followed, for Korea, for India and Pakistan, for the Middle East, for teaching us that protection and upgrade capability matter more than impressive specifications. We brought the L7 gun home, called it the M68, put it in our tanks. That gun kept American and Israeli crews alive for 20 years. That is Nate's death teaching us. That is this tank teaching us. That is every crew that survived because someone decided to learn the right lessons. He stepped back from the podium. Being 11 days late was not failure. It was preparation for 50 years of victories. And my brother's death at 19 in a tank built wrong gave me 38 years to understand why this one was built right. The ceremony ended quietly. People filed past the tank, touched the armor, read the placard, tried to imagine surviving atomic fire. Aldridge stood alone as the crowd dispersed, ran his hand along the glass's armor, felt the metal warm under summer sun. Devora approached one last time. "Your brother would be proud, Colonel, of what you learned, of what you taught." "I hope so. I spent 38 years trying to make his death mean something. It does. Every crew that came home because you brought the M68 to America. Every tank designed with better crew protection because you showed them this philosophy works. Every soldier who survived because you would not let the lessons die. That is meaning. That is legacy." She saluted. He returned it. Then she was gone. Aldridge drove to Arlington National Cemetery before heading home, found Nate's grave in Section 60. Simple white headstone like thousands of others. Nathaniel Aldridge, Private First Class U.S. Army, 1925 to 1944. He knelt slowly, age and old wounds making the motion difficult, placed his hand on the stone. "We learned, little brother. Took me 38 years. Took watching men survive what you didn't. Took learning that being late is sometimes exactly right. But we learned." The M68 gun is saving lives. The Israelis still use Centurions, still upgrade them, still bring their crews home. South Africa, too. Even Britain keeps finding uses for the design, 50 years and still teaching. You died because we built wrong, because we chose cheap over good, because we sacrificed men to save money. But your death taught me to recognize the difference, to fight for the right choices, to never stop trying to bring the boys home. A breeze moved through the cemetery. Birds called in the distance, the sun warm on his shoulders. "I miss you, Nate. Every damn day I miss you. But you are still teaching, still pushing, still making me better." He stood slowly, saluted the grave. Then he walked back to his car, drove home to his wife and daughter and grandchildren, to the life Nate never got to have, but carrying forward the lessons, carrying forward the legacy. The tank that came 11 days too late for World War II sits in Aberdeen still, polished, preserved, a monument to survival and philosophy and the choices that matter. Visitors read the placard, take pictures, move on to the next exhibit. Most never know the full story, never understand what those 11 days meant, never realize that sometimes arriving late is the most important thing you can do, because it gives you time to learn, time to understand, time to get it right for all the wars that follow. Thaddeus Aldridge died in 1997, 77 years old, buried at Arlington 3 rows from his brother. His obituary mentioned his service, his decorations, his work bringing the M68 gun to American tanks. But his legacy lived in every crew that survived, in every upgrade philosophy that prioritized people over platforms, in every lesson learned from a tank that arrived too late and spent 50 years proving that late was exactly the right time. Nathaniel Aldridge died at 19 in a Sherman built wrong. Thaddeus Aldridge spent 53 years making sure others survived in tanks built right. That is what brothers do. That is what 11 days late really means. The Centurion still teaches, in museums, in Israeli Defense Force training, in South African Oliphant variants rolling across modern battlefields, in the philosophy that influenced every main battle tank that followed. The tank that came too late changed everything, because sometimes failure teaches you what success never could. Sometimes arriving late means you have time to learn the lessons that matter. Sometimes 11 days is exactly the right amount of time to understand what really counts. Protection, upgrade, survival, legacy. Those are the lessons of the tank that came too late. Those are the lessons written in Nathaniel Aldridge's death. Those are the lessons Thaddeus Aldridge spent a lifetime teaching. And they echo still in every tank designed to bring crews home, in every upgrade that extends a platform's life, in every choice to value men over metal. The lessons echo. The tank endures, the legacy lives, 11 days too late for one war, perfectly on time for all the wars that followed.